For me and mine, 2017 is going to be a year of resistance. The concept of resistance is something that I've been using a lot in my understanding of what Christianity is and how it functions, how I relate to the world, what our time period calls for, what's going on in our culture and society around us. It isn't something that's just cropped up recently, but it definitely seems like something that has recently caught on with a lot of people and which a lot of people are talking about. And when I talk about resistance, I often use grandiose sounding metaphors. Yesterday on my way to worship, I was playing the Hamilton soundtrack, just reflecting on that feeling and that necessity of building oneself up toward a revolution. I've also been using the themes from the most recent Star Wars movie, Rogue One, to talk about and reflect upon the ideas of resistance.
1789.
And look, I love grandiose metaphors. I love, big sweeping stories. They motivate me, they help me. I use them to make meaning out of my life. But I also get that for some people it can be the opposite of motivating. It can be sort of off-putting. People don't necessarily see themselves as heroes or villains. They see themselves as living normal lives, and it can be difficult to try and translate something that is being used from a story like Star Wars, which is full of stark black and white images, into the reality of our own experience. I mean, a lot of my fellow clergy friends are talking about Bonhoeffer as a model for how to resist, but maybe you're not ready yet to join a plot to assassinate Hitler. Or maybe you think it's melodramatic for me to use metaphors that stark. I am kind of a melodramatic person by nature, but even when I put on my realistic hat these days, the situation seems severe enough to justify some pretty stark metaphors. Nevertheless, it's worth it for me to try to come up with some metaphors which speak to people who are in a different place.
2020, please. Any hot sauce?
No thanks. So here's one way to think about resistance. While I was driving to church yesterday, blasting that Hamilton soundtrack, thinking to myself about resistance in grandiose metaphorical terms, I also noticed that on the road, there were these grooves in the pavement that were filling up with water, raining as it always does here in Portland. The grooves were from all of the tires of the cars that had driven on the road before me. They'd formed these shallow little grooves. They're not noticeable when it's dry, but when it's wet, these grooves fill up with water, and your car, if you get into those grooves, will hydroplane. It will just sort of skate along on the surface of the water, and you lose a little bit of control of the vehicle. You can't turn or control your speed or brake very well. It's a little bit of a frightening experience. It's dangerous to ride in those grooves. So it's safer to drive to one side or the other of the lane in an unorthodox position, not right in the center of the lane where we normally drive, but pulling to the right or to the left so that your wheels aren't riding in those grooves where all of the other cars are. But what I noticed is that it's hard to do this. Your car just sort of naturally drifts back down into the grooves. The grooves are lower and it pulls your tires into them, but they're also right in the middle and the easiest part of the lane for you to drive in. It's difficult to stay out of those grooves. So resistance is like this. The path that our society has laid out for us, the one that most people are going to tread, the one that most people have already tread ahead of us and have worn those grooves in the pavement that make it difficult to avoid walking that path, is a dangerous one. It's a violent one, it's a xenophobic one, it's a misogynist one, it is one which is going to be destructive to our planet and destructive to the most vulnerable people who live in our society and around the world. We have to resist that path. We have to resist being pulled into that path. But resistance doesn't have to look like some grandiose rebellion. It can look as something as simple as continually reminding yourself that you need to turn slightly to the left or to the right. You need to get yourself up on to the higher part of the lane, onto the drier part of the lane, where you're not going to hydroplane yourself and everyone with you into a wall. Hey y'all, the new year seemed like a good time for me to get back into making these videos. I'm going to try and release one a week. There'll be probably a whole bunch of different styles. This one is an example of what I'm going to be calling dispatches from the resistance, which are me just sort of trying to talk through my process of how I try to shape my life in a way which is resistant to dominant forces in our culture, which I think are destructive, and to hopefully encourage others to join me in that process. But I'll still be doing like talking about geeky movies and books and scriptural interpretation and whatever else I'm inspired to do on this channel. So hope to see more of you. Bye.